So 1989, not the greatest of years for the 80s slasher films. A lot of franchises were getting well into their many sequels, some more disappointing than others. However, I will say I have a soft spot for Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. It's a ridiculous film, but it is so fun and entertaining. I've got nostalgic memories of it, being younger and watching it when it was airing on TV, but it is fun. It does veer far from what was in the franchise. But do you know what? If you have followed the franchise to that point, it does evolve and, they kind of get a bit more ridiculous. I mean, number seven, with the telekinesis and stuff is a bit out there from the first few in particular. And then obviously going to eight where, Jason is boarding a boat and going to Manhattan to rage terror, which, the last part of that film, when Jason actually does go to Manhattan and goes on a rampage causing all kinds of chaos, that is just pure horror entertainment. That's why I love that film so much. It is the final act of the film. I mean, it is absolutely crazy in a fun way. It's entertaining. It's got kills and gore, everything you would want from an 80s slasher film, but it is done in a really kind of big party package, which, I can see why people think it is ridiculous and too far and it kind of has lost its way. But if you can just look at it for entertainment purposes, then I think it has a bad rap. I don't think it killed the franchise at all. I know it did essentially, but for me, it just made me enjoy that franchise and Jason even more. And obviously, when Jason Goes to Hell came out, I adored that one. I thought that was one of the craziest. So maybe it did a good thing with Paramount ending it because of number eight being so bad and going to New Line. So there's a perk there. But the most disappointing of these 80s horror film franchises for me was probably Amityville 4. The reason being is I think Amityville was a good, strong starting point, the first one. And do you know what? The second was a very interesting, strong film. But as they went on, I feel like they were really scraping the barrel to make a franchise out of that. It wasn't really a film that you'd think would have so many sequels. I mean, it's gone into silly territory now, especially in the indie market. I mean, it's a proper cash grab and cash cow. But those films just became weaker and weaker. They're okay, but they're more like TV movies. So I think that's why it's the most disappointing for me because the first was a strong cinematic horror masterpiece in its own right. And, some of the early sequels like two and three are weaker, but they've got, particularly two, has got an interesting take and is actually very dark. A dark film, which I liked. It kind of was brave and bold, but when you get to number four, it is kind of almost TV trash horror territory, which it's just become weaker and weaker. And that's the sort of film you watch and you just realise the good old days are gone and they don't make them like they used to. And I think Amityville 4 does sum that up a little bit, unfortunately. Okay, this is quite a hard, difficult thing to talk about and question being asked regarding the film Clown House, which is a very cool 80s horror film, but surrounded in controversy with Victor Salva being prosecuted for very bad crimes towards the young person on the set. Now, this is one of those hard things. Do you take the monster away from the art and enjoy the art for what it is, or having a monster behind the art tarnish it? Well, I mean, the problem is Victor Salva actually came back and did the Jeepers Creepers films. So, and I think there was a whole generation of people not actually realizing what he had done, and those films were very successful on his comeback, but then obviously dirt comes to life again and history's repeated itself. But the question is I do try to enjoy a film for what it is. There is many a projects out there where people involved or people behind them aren't the best people in real life, and that does go for a lot of films I like, and it's unfortunate because it doesn't mean the film is bad. It's just people behind it have made ridiculous decisions in life and done crazy things which they shouldn't have done. But it is a shame to cancel art because of that, because if that was the case, there would be an awful lot of art in film, music, literature would have to go. So cancel culture is a funny thing, really. I think obviously people should be respectful. You shouldn't do bad things, but you can't erase history. So if a film is made, you can't erase it from existence. And also a lot of other people worked on it and weren't bad or didn't do bad things. So it's a shame and horrible for the people that were innocent and not bad people to have all their work scrapped and thrown away. I mean, Clown House isn't really an accessible film anyway. It's quite hard to get hold of and see because it has been buried, which I understand why. But it's interesting that other filmmakers such as Roman Polanski have their work on Criterion releases when they do have some similar charges to answer for. To sum that up, to be honest, is I know it's hard for some people to take away the monster behind work, but to be honest, I think there's also a lot of people that aren't massive cinephiles or know a lot, so they wouldn't even know. So they would watch the film not knowing the story behind it, that the filmmakers had done bad things. So, there is that side of it where the film just plays to an audience as a horror film and they consume and enjoy it. I mean, if you like a horror film, that's not a bad thing on you. It's not your fault that someone did a bad thing either. But again, if I was a victim or a victim's family member, then obviously my point of view might be a bit more different. So, I mean, if you know what you're letting yourself in for, it's up to you, really. But as I say, I know many of people that probably would watch that film not realizing the story behind it. So this is where, if that film was completely cancelled and erased, these people wouldn't get to enjoy a horror film they might really like. Now, Fly 2, this is another film that I absolutely adore, a classic to me. So the first Fly, the remake that David Cronenberg did with Jeff Goldblum, is incredible. It's an incredible movie. I mean, that is like top tier body horror. So it's an example where the remake is just much better than the original. I know the original is a classic, but the remake is loads better. The effects in that, to this day, are amazing because it's practical effects. I recently watched that, actually only yesterday I had that on, and it's still such a great film. I mean, the story, the cinematography, the editing, everything is on point with that film. Now, Fly 2 had big boots to fill. And again, it's another film where at first you're like, does that need a sequel? Because The Fly is quite a rounded film and just, beginning, middle and end done. It didn't seem like it was the sort of film that would have a sequel, but as always, studios like to try and milk something until it can be milked no more and move on. But Fly 2, again, I think it's a film that has a bit of a bad rep because it's an inferior film, a sequel to a classic. But I will say, Fly 2 continues to have amazing special effects. I think it's a really well made film. I think it's got a really good story that follows on and carries on really well. It's got some really emotional scenes in that film. When I first watched it, I was broken. I mean, spoiler alert, but the boy's dog that is experimented on and he begrudgingly puts to sleep to put it out of its misery. I mean, that had me in tears. I mean, that scene has stuck with me all my life and will do. That is one of the most emotional scenes of cinema history. It's an incredible movie because performances are good. As I say, the story is strong. It actually gave me a lot of emotion for a crazy sequel horror film. Who would have thought? But it does. And the effects are almost as good as the original, to be honest. And I love the fact that you see the full transformation of the Fly. You actually see what the full end result of this human fly hybrid is. And that last act, like with Jason Takes Manhattan, Friday the 13th Part 8, is incredible. The third act, it builds up and it delivers. There's carnage, there's violence, there's action. It's just mad. People that are bad characters that you despise get their comeuppance. I mean, it ends on a high for me. So it's a roller coaster of a journey. And it ends fantastically. You get what you want. You want these characters to go on this journey, and it delivers. I really, really like it. I think it's, I highly recommend Fly 2, to be honest. I love that film. So Amityville 3 was a success, with number 4 going straight to NBC. As I was saying earlier, feels like a TV movie. I just feel like the reason that those films sloped is because they had milked the story dry. I mean, the first Amityville film is loosely based on a real life crime, and taking the inspiration from that and making a haunted house film, I mean, there's only so much you can do. I really feel like it's a cash grab, and they have run out of really strong ideas to make them cinematic. I think the story had run its course, especially by the end of the third one. I mean, where else are you going to go? How many other spins can you do on this house? It is like the series of films House. I mean, the only thing is Amityville tried to contain it in this one house with this story, whereas the films House, House 2, House 3, which wasn't even supposed to be a house entry, in House 4, they they kind of go on their own journeys, linked together very loosely. It's a hard thing to do as a filmmaker and a writer, and I just purely think it's down to the fact that they wanted to keep rights to Amityville, probably, and business-wise it made sense, and they wanted to see if they could milk a bit of income, but there was no way there was a cinematic film there after so many, you know, they've already run the pot dry. Also, when you start making made-for-TV movies, budgets are restrained, stunts, effects, it's a stricter thing to follow for TV, especially back then. And the budgets being tighter impacts everything regarding cinematography, editing, stunts, everything is impacted. So you get a cheaper and more below average product. So that was kind of the nail in the coffin for the Amityville franchise, I believe, even though it continued in indie film form to go on to a zillion prequels, requels, sequels, trequels. A 1989 horror film that stood out to me, which I thought was really good, is the underrated film Intruder by Scott Spiegel. Now, that film has some really creative camera work, and the director then went on to repeat that in like From Dusk Till Dawn 2, Texas Blood Money. It is more of an independent film and a more of an underseen film, but it's ridiculous, over the top, gory, mad inventive kills, full of silliness. It kind of sums up what I've been talking about here about 1989 films. I mean, I think that's top tier ridiculousness, and it's more over the top than Friday the 13th Part 8 and films like that. And Fly 2. It's up there, but it's pure entertainment, and it's quite a simple, easy watch, and that's why I like it. I mean, I love intellectual, hard-hitting films, but sometimes it's nice to sit down, relax, put on a mind-numbing, easy-to-follow, silly film for entertainment purposes, lose yourself in it, and Intruder does that. Intruder's just a very fun, silly film with very creative gore. I will say it has some really creative kills which stand out, and quite pushing at the time of its release as well. So it's a good one, again, one I highly recommend. So Howling 5 is another horror franchise sequel. Now, the first Howling film is incredible. The series is a little bit up and down, just like with all these franchises. Number 2 had an interesting take, but quite out there. And then I think they got a little bit worse, but 5 did peak back up. Howling 5, which is strange to get to the 5th entry in a sequel and it then to start building back up, but it did. It was atmospheric. I think Howling 5 is atmospheric. It's got a very good setting. I like the castle setting, and it was just a good, fun horror film, and atmosphere makes that one. I was actually quite young when I watched that, and it was quite impactful. It was quite a scary journey, so that stands out to me, and it left a lasting impact. So again, like with Friday the 13th Part 8, I have a little bit of nostalgia attached to the film, but I do genuinely believe it is a very well crafted piece of work, and not so much like gore and horror in that sense, but does have the atmosphere that makes a good horror film. So on that note, I would recommend that if you like your tense, scary films. And I know you've come a long way getting the 5th in a franchise, and I don't think it's a patch on the original first Howling film, but I do think it's a good film in its own right, and does deserve that recognition for its own thing. Now, did 1989 kill the horror genre for the 90s? I don't know, because 90s had some interesting horror. I will say that I do think the 90s was a much weaker decade for film in general, let alone horror, than the 80s was. There are a few gems that come along, like Candyman was incredible, and that was quite a fresh new take. I'm a big fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula that come out in '92, the Francis Ford Coppola film. But it's a very different decade, a very different era, and to be honest, you're never going to get films like the 80s again. Now, they try to recreate them, they try to manipulate them and mold them, but they just don't land, hit, full. You can't recreate something that's been and gone properly. It's a product of circumstance and of its time. And unfortunately, those days have gone. But we did get some interesting stuff since. I think the 80s laid some foundations for horror film that did continue regarding pushing boundaries. Although in the UK, with the video nasties and the BBFC, it became a very restrictive zone, and I do believe films were a bit more careful for a long time, and then eventually, in the noughties, they started to really push boundaries until we're at a point now where, the content has become crazy in all kinds of films and cinema now, which is a good thing to me. I like boundary pushing, but I do think 80s was a foundation block that really laid the blueprints to where we've come now. And we wouldn't have as much fun if it wasn't for a lot of these. And to be honest, a lot of these films have had inferior remakes. Some remakes are not bad, but a fair few inferior remakes. Prequels and sequels have also come along. So really carrying on the work that was set up. Not always landing as well, but hey, we get some fun, entertaining films here and there. But it's yes and no to did it kill it. I think a lot of films run its course, and people wanted more originality. Something like Candyman was a bit more original when it come out. So, there's good and bad, but I just think it was laying the path for much more fun horror to come later on.